So this is a video I've been meaning to make for a while. If you watched the channel for a bit, you may know I've had the OP-1 Field for a long time, and I wanted it longer than I've had it for sure. Basically, since it was announced, this has looked to me like one of the coolest devices that's ever been made. In past videos, I have talked about the features I really like, but today I need to talk about why I think the OP-1 Field is overpriced and overhyped. So to properly understand my view on the OP-1 Field, I think it's important to talk about why someone would pay $2,000 for this device, or why I paid $2,000 for this device. First, there's just really nothing quite like this in the market. And I think that gets to the heart of why they felt like they could charge $2,000. Even though there are amazing manufacturers out there making all kinds of standalone devices, nobody is trying to make something this small, this portable, and in some ways this capable in a single package. The closest things I can think of are things like the Tracker from Polyend, which doesn't have a battery, the Tracker Mini, which isn't out yet but does have a battery and does have stereo sampling and might be the closest competitor to this, but doesn't have a built-in MIDI keyboard for real-time note entry and doesn't have the same sort of built-in synthesizers. Outside of that, you run into the territory of things like the Circuit Tracks, which is far more limited in a lot of ways. And then you get to the big boys like the MPCs and the Machine Plus, and you start to run out of similar devices. I wanted to love this thing so bad. I never owned an original OP-1, and I really wanted one. But there were things about the OP-1 that turned me off, and the biggest one was the 4-track tape recording at the heart of this device. On the original OP-1, you only had one tape, one project, essentially. Now, people who've used it a lot will tell you, you can make little loops across the tape. Those could be the basis of new tracks, right? But you would be tied to 1 BPM, is my understanding, unless you changed it per little section. On the OP-1 Field, the big innovation was that there are now 8 possible projects or tape tracks, each of which I believe is 6 minutes. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. There are different types of tape because the OP-1 Field also has a very clean and pristine sound, which is one of the things I really like about it. But the reason this device falls flat for me is primarily the price. Even if they drop the price all the way down to like $500, $800, this would still not be worth it for me because of the recording tape paradigm. Now, that might be controversial. There are going to be people who love this device for sure. There are going to be people who like the limitations that come into play when you have to essentially decide, okay, I'm out of tape tracks, what am I going to record over? But that is compounded by the fact, and you may know this, there's no undo button on this device, which is extremely unique and goes hand in hand with the fake tape paradigm. Because there's no undo, Ben Jordan has talked about this, other people have talked about this device discourages experimentation. Because at a certain point, you've got something going and then you get worried. You're like, well, if I record over this and I mess up, and you will mess up because there's no quantization after you record. There are sequencers on board, although they're very limited compared to the competitors, at least devices that have sequencers, because there's really no competitor in this form factor. Basically, this device is a Swiss Army knife of extremely sharp, capable tools that is held together by flimsy manufacturing. Not literally, because literally this is maybe the most well-machined and manufactured music device I've ever seen, but conceptually in the sense that using the tape tracks is such a bummer. It is such a, for me personally, and I'm just a guy on the internet, so if you disagree with me, that is totally okay. I'm not the end-all be-all authority. I'm telling you about why I feel like I overhyped this device, why the world has overhyped this device, and why it does not feel worth $2,000 to me. If you disagree, by all means, spend your money, do your thing. I'm not here to yuck your yum. I'm not here to mess with your good vibes. I just need to get this out there because I get comments on some of my videos of people being like, I bought this because of you. And that's my nightmare, dude. Do not buy this because of me. This is my video saying don't buy this. And I'm serious. Like, I really don't think people should buy this. I don't think we should encourage this. And there are so many YouTubers who've either gotten it for free or gotten it for a discount, or make so much money from music gear and music YouTube that this is not going to be a huge drop in the bucket for them. But $2,000 is a lot of money for me still. It's a lot more money from some other people who don't even make YouTube ad revenue. Not that I make a ton, but at least sometimes videos can make me some money back, which is not always true for people. There are reasons to buy this. The sampling is really cool. Because of how high quality the sampler is, you can basically clone any music device into this. The onboard synthesizers are better than I gave them credit for, and really there's just so much going on here that's so cool. Again, no one makes a device like this. The battery life is fantastic. It feels extremely well built. Although I've heard there are issues with some units with keys, and I've also heard horror stories about Teenage Engineering's repairability and warranty programs, and I myself encountered that when I had an OP-Z back in the day. But for the most part, there's a lot to love about this device. I mean, aesthetically, I think this is the best looking music production device anyone's ever made, up there with the Machine Plus and the Ableton Push 3. But in functionality, because of the tape paradigm, it is so limited. The sequencers are way too basic, which is crazy because this is the company that makes the OP-Z, which is arguably my favorite portable sequencer. If they just had a device with this kind of capability, with this kind of build quality, with these keys, but had a sequencer, 8-track or even 16-track sequencer MIDI paradigm built in instead of these tapes, and then maybe let you record your performances to an 8-track tape, that would be fantastic. Something like the MC707, but in this form factor, would be a killer. And it is so frustrating to see companies like Roland make all of these tiny little boutique synths and nothing that challenges this. I truly wonder if there's some sort of like patent that that Teenage Engineering has on small form factor DAW in a box, which is probably not true because this is notoriously cloned from other small synthesizers in the past. But no one has tried to compete with this. Now, not to be gas therapy, so shout out to gas therapy, but the biggest killer for this is the iPad. It's the only thing that comes close now. An iPad running Logic Pro is the death knell for this device. I mean, arguably, even an iPad running GarageBand is the death knell for this device. But Logic Pro has advanced samplers and additional synthesizers and different things that make it a much better device or a better piece of software compared to GarageBand, especially if you want to take your song out of Logic Pro somewhere else. That, to me, running my iPad Pro with Logic Pro was like part of a few series of cuts on this device that just made me realize this was not the one for me. The other thing was the fact it's $2,000, which is the same price as the Ableton Push 3. Now, we're talking about a totally different category of size of device, but when those two prices get put up next to each other, I start looking really seriously at both devices. The Ableton Push over here is a big guy, but it is far more of a studio in a box than what this thing claims to be. And really sadly, what this thing could be. I think for me, the OP-1 Field is so much missed potential because Teenage Engineering seems to be so far distracted in their own different designer direction that they are releasing things that on paper should be so capable and then just seem so limited on execution. And I have friends who have contacts with them, and I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus. If you're having a different experience with these devices, by all means, like I said, more power to you. But I don't get this stuff for free. I don't have contacts over there. And frankly, I'm not really interested in having contacts over there because until they start making devices that feel like they're made for people again, I don't know, man. The use cases I've seen people stretch to make this device make sense, outside of a few creators who really have flourished with this thing, it's just, people have said it before, but there's so much other stuff you can get with your money. And for a while, I was frustrated because it didn't feel like there was anything comparable. People are like, oh, you can get a huge giant workstation synthesizer for $2,000. And it's like, yeah, but the reason I wanted this is it's small. Like, I know there's big synths for big money. I wanted something small and capable. And until Logic Pro and the iPad, it kind of felt like there wasn't anything in this space. But now that Logic Pro is on the iPad, I just think it obliterates this thing. I mean, you can get a used iPad Pro M1 in like the $500, $600 range that would run circles around this thing and would let you do it all in a self-contained way. The only feature this really has against the iPad, maybe two features, is a built-in headphone jack, which it's still unreal that Apple removed that and then put their DAW on the iPad after there's no headphone jack. But two, a built-in MIDI controller. Now, I actually don't mind using the touchscreen on the iPad, and you can easily add a MIDI controller if you want to over Bluetooth or USB, but there is something so compelling about having all of this just built into one device. It's why when you look at it, you want it. At least it's why when I looked at it, I wanted it, because on paper, in theory, this thing should be the end-all be-all, and then it is so limited by its hardware. So let's talk about how you could maybe fix it. The first thing I would do is jump the tape tracks up to 8. If I had 8 tape tracks, a lot of my concerns here wouldn't be as big because it would be pretty easy to have individual components of your song have individual tracks and not run into each other. Before someone comments, you can use the separate stereo tracks. I don't want to do that. I don't want 8 mono tracks. I want 8 stereo tracks. It's a $2,000 device. And frankly, I realized the other day, we're giving them way too much credit for having 8 tapes in total. This thing should have like 50 projects on it. It is $2,000. We should not be applauding the fact they went from 1 project tape to 8. For $2,000 for your field kit that hypothetically you're taking on the road for hours or days or months or years, who knows, it should have like 20, 30, 40, 50 tapes, man. It should have a lot of projects on board. And it really should have 8 tapes or 8 tracks or more of tape per project. Stereo tracks, similar to the Polyend Tracker Mini, which will have 8 stereo tracks, I believe. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. And then it really needs an undo button, man. It really needs an undo. It's a virtual tape. It's a fake tape. It's not a hardware tape. Like, I know that the current software on board writes, if recorded to tape, permanent. Sure. But at the end of the day, they designed this whole thing in and out. It's one of the benefits of owning the whole widget, as Steve Jobs might say. They can make this anything they want it to be, and it needs an undo. It needs an undo so bad. If it had an undo and like record quantization, I might even be okay with the 4 tracks. So I think those are some of the ways this could really improve. And it's not impossible for some of those things to happen because there's a lot of headroom, there's a lot of storage, although not compared to other devices. There is like 5 gigs of storage on here, which sounds like nothing, again, compared to everything else, but it is a fairly substantial amount compared to the original OP-1. But at the end of the day, even if it had the 8 tracks, even if it had undo, even if it had way more projects that you could save, I just don't know if the tape paradigm is for me, especially without way more robust sequencers on board to play with before you get there. If this had like a software OPZ inside of it that then recorded to 8 tracks of tape, like I said, this would be such a killer device, especially with more synth engines, which I think the headroom of the device will make possible. I think there will be more synth engines. I don't know if anything else I'm saying will happen, but I do think there will be more synth engines because there were more synth engines over time for the OPZ, and because there's so much headroom and such a probably long lifespan for this device. The original OP-1 was supported for 10 years. I'm sure this one will be supported at least for 5 or more. But at the end of the day, I still just think $2,000 is crazy for this, and everyone said it, but it's still true. Like, just because everyone keeps saying it doesn't mean it's not true, or that it's like blown out of proportion. This is way too expensive for what you get. I would argue this really shouldn't be any more than $1,200, and it would still need some of the additional features I've already talked about. And I know we're, going through a large macroeconomic environment for the last 2 years, so, take a shot or whatever, but like this pricing is ridiculous. For everything else that's in the market now, this is unreal. You can get an MPC-1 on the used market for like $400, $500. You can get the brand new MPC-1 Plus, which doesn't have too many new features, but it's brand new and will be supported for a long time and would have a warranty, presumably. That's like $700 without a sale. And you're immediately looking at so much more power and upgradability with an SD port. And on the Plus, you have, Bluetooth similar to this and Wi-Fi similar to this. So you can, or at least, I don't know if this says Wi-Fi, but it does have Bluetooth. And you can connect Bluetooth MIDI and things like that and sync with Ableton Sync, like this I believe can. And so then you're talking about, 700 versus 2000. And yes, this has a battery and the MPC-1 doesn't, but you can power it off of an external battery pack if you wanted to. And honestly, I would even, if I was really looking at all these devices, I would also throw the Machine Plus in the conversation. I've seen that thing go down to like 1100 brand new, presumably even cheaper used. And then the big boy, the Ableton Push 3. The Ableton Push 3 is the death knell for this device for me. I start thinking about the devices I own and what I would actually use to build songs that could eventually be on my albums, that would actually be finished tracks, and the pain points and the roadblocks that the OP-1 has are just completely eradicated on the Ableton Push 3. If someone could make a small device like this that worked like the Ableton Push, God, like someone like Novation, right, made like a Trax Pro, or like a Circuit Keys, right? Oh my gosh. And it had like 4 sample tracks, 4 synth tracks, and they were all stereo, and you had a little screen. Like, why is no one here? Why is no one competing? This is why this thing gets to be 2000, because there's simply no one else in this exact space at all. There's a million groove boxes around the size of an MPC-1 or an MPC Live. There's so many desktop synths and keyboard synths, but there's only one OP-1, and this is why they get away with this. This is why they were able to have those crazy jacked up prices when the original OP-1 was out of stock for a while. And it's It's so frustrating that no one's in the space, because there are manufacturers out there, and I'm just going to say their names. We're on good terms, so I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but if Akai or Native Instruments were in this space, that would be huge. It would be unreal if someone else who had the hardware and software backbone to make something small and capable, even if it was 1,000, even if it was 1,500, but it was a real studio like this, but real, really capable. It would be unfathomable. And there will probably be people in my comments saying, you're asking for too much. Just make music, nerd. I make music. You can make music. But like, it's also, I think, good to want more, to want better. These are not our friends. These are companies. And they are trying to make things we want. And I think people buying this thing are telling Teenage Engineering that this is good and this is okay. And I'm going to say it's not. I'm going to say it's so limited and so expensive that it is simply too overpriced and too overhyped to be even close to worth it. And again, all love to anyone who feels differently. I'm not trying to rain on your parade, but I am trying to talk to the people out there who have hard gear acquisition syndrome for this, who really want this, who are saving up their money and looking at other devices and thinking about selling things so they can get this. And I'm telling you, do not do it, dude. And in fact, this may actually hurt my chances of being able to sell this, because sometimes I sell things and people are like, I watched your video. But that's fine. I will take the loss on the selling price of this if it means enough people save their hard-earned money. Because right now in 2023, in July, this thing is not worth it, man. And it is such a heartbreaking situation because there's so much I like about it. The sound quality, the portability, the capability. From a generating sound perspective, there's a pretty good argument for it until you think about everything else that generates sound better and is cheaper. And from a recording perspective, there really isn't a good argument for it, because then you start looking at all the other things that can record audio, and it just starts not really adding up. And this, again, is where I think, not to be gas therapy, and again, love to gas therapy. I'm not trying to steal his whole thing, but an iPad, even with just GarageBand, in some ways blows this out of the water. And an iPad with Logic murders this thing. If you don't want to touch a screen, then I guess it doesn't, but I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm sure there's an audience for this. I know there's an audience for this. And I'm not trying, again, to disparage anyone who likes this. Indian Roy Music does really good stuff with the OP-1 field. There are people out there who can do really cool stuff with the OP-1 field. But I just feel like for your average user, if you're putting $2,000 into a device, or even $1,000, even $600, it should be something that you have so much room to grow and learn with, and that the skills you learn are going to transfer over to other things. So much of the gear I use teaches me how to use the other gear I use. This device is so up its own that I just don't think, no, man. I'm having a full-scale breakdown. I didn't want to make this video. I really try not to make negative stuff. I think negative stuff ages pretty poorly. There's a good chance they'll fix everything. And if they do, then I may make an update video, but I probably won't make it with my own OP-1 field, because I don't think this thing is worth it, and I'm not going to keep it. Anyway, I really appreciate you watching. I'm sorry to just spew negativity this week. I've had a rough week. I'm down in the dumps. I'm not feeling good. I almost didn't make a video. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to put this energy into this thing I've wanted to talk about for a while and haven't. If you worked on this device, you do deserve huge applause. I think it's worth noting that all these things are, labors of love and really intense undertakings. And again, there's so much to like about this, but there are so many missing Swiss cheese holes in this thing that just make it not worth it right now. And I really think Teenage Engineering needs a wake-up call. The reason people loved the OP-1 was because it was an affordable, exciting device. That's why they like the OP-Z. It's why they like the Pocket Operators. And now we are just getting $2,000 device after $2,000 device. And I get it. You want to be a boutique designer brand. But if you're going to play in the music-making space, compete. And this does not compete. It does not compete on capability, and it certainly doesn't compete on price. If you like this video, consider liking and subscribing. I have music on all the streaming services. I have links to buy other gear that I would recommend over this, such as the MPC-1, the iPad, Machine Plus, or any other multitude of devices you could get that I think are better than this. But I really strongly recommend you don't buy this. Okay, have a good week ahead. And again, sorry for the bad vibes. I'm sure next week we'll be happier. I hope. All right, bye.